comes, they walk away. Well, they're not done yet, because what happens in verse 13 is, then they sent to him some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to catch him in his words. Now keep in mind that what's happening is you have to understand the underlying terms here. The Pharisees were the religious leaders of that day. They would be the ones who would be absolutely against Rome. In other words, they were the strict sect within the religion. Now the Herodians would be those who accepted Rome. And what was happening here is now the two people who would be at odds normally find themselves united to a single cause. So keep in mind that what they're doing is sort of like putting the Hatfields and the McCoys to take on the Joneses. That's what they're doing here. And all of a sudden, the two people who would have been at enmity, the two groups, are now united in their cause against Jesus Christ. And I want you to note how the Holy Spirit brings this out through John. And it said, then they, that would be the religious leaders, sent to him some of the Pharisees and Herodians to catch him in his words. In other words, to hunt him down and trap him. Now, because of the multitudes, they're thinking, well, we have to do something to trip him up. So, verse 14, when they had come, they said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true. You care about no one, for you do not regard the person of men, but you teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Now, I'll be honest. These guys know how to spread it on thick. They really do. They come and say, Teacher, we know that you are true. But keep in mind, their whole intent is to do what? To catch him in his words. And as they're doing this, they're trying to say, well, let me soften you up. Because we know that you teach the way of God in truth. Now keep in mind that as they're saying he speaks the way of God, now what they're doing is they're bringing out here this question socially. They ask the question, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, Why do you test me? Now, I want you to understand that they're expecting either a yes or a no answer. And what Jesus does is they say, well, is it lawful to pay taxes? Now, if he would to say A, no, it is not lawful to pay taxes. At this point, the Herodians, who are in the cahoots with Rome, will now go and say, hey, guess what? This man who claims to be the Messiah is going to be setting up his own kingdom. He's rejecting the kingdom of Rome. He's rejecting that we even pay taxes. You guys need to deal with him. So, if he chooses A, he loses. But now if he chooses B, and they would say, well, is it lawful to pay taxes? He says, well, absolutely. Yes, you should be paying taxes. Then the Pharisees, who are against Rome, now say, listen, he claimed to be the Messiah, and now we find out that in all reality, he is for Rome. He's not your friend. Let's reject him, because all the Jews had one mindset. They were waiting for the Messiah to come and thinking the Messiah was going to establish his kingdom here on earth, and that the Messiah would what? He would conquer Rome. And that was the mindset. So the Pharisee could say, well, he's not the Messiah. He's now agreeing with Rome. So if he chooses A, he loses. If he chooses B, he loses. So what does Jesus do? Well, Jesus gives them C. He gives them the Christ. He gives them an answer that can only be from the Lord. Now, I love the Lord because they just got done saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and you teach the way of God." And then he looks at them, "Why are you guys testing me?" He's not even playing their game. He understands, listen, you guys have come in a very real sense to catch me up, to hunt me down and to trap me in words. Why are you testing me? And then he says this, "Bring me a denarius that I may see it." Incredible wisdom. Now, one of two things. There are some who say, wow, can you imagine Jesus was so poor that he didn't even have a denarius? Now, ultimately it would be like a penny, but a denarius would be simply a day's wage for a day's work. And they would say, Jesus was so poor, he didn't even have a denarius. Oh, poor Jesus. But I want you to recognize what he's doing. Jesus is looking at these religious leaders, and he's asking them for one thing. He is saying, basically, what do you recognize as the authority in society? In other words, give me what you recognize as currency. And if you have any currency, you recognize that authority of your society. In other words, if I asked you for some money, who here would give me a franc? Nobody would give me a franc. I mean, unless it's a hot dog or something, then you would. But now, who would give me a euro? Well, no one would give me a euro. Who here would give me a buck? Who here has a buck? I mean, but you know what I'm saying? The question is if I said money, you would give me what? You would give me the money that you have already recognized is the standard of our society and the money of the government through which you are under. And so when he asks for a denarius, what he's saying is, in the society, who do you recognize as the authority? Where is the coin? Now what they didn't do, they didn't give him a temple tax. He simply says, well, here's the denarius. And he asked them for the standard, the monetary value within the society. And what do? They pull out a denarius. Now on that denarius, he asked them the question. They said, bring me a denarius that I may see it. You give me the currency of the society that you are under authority with. So they brought it. And he said to them, well, whose image and whose inscription is on this? In other words, the coin that you yourselves have given to me. Whose image was on the coin that you gave to me? Whose inscription was on the coin that you gave to me? What do you recognize as the authority in the society because you gave me this coin? They go, Caesar's. And all of a sudden, what they've done in a real sense is they've said, we recognize Caesar as our earthly authority in the society because they gave him Caesar's coin. So when he said, why don't you give me a coin, they gave him Caesar. They gave him his image and his inscription. And so he says, hey, then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. And I love this because here's a question. Is it right to pay more than one debt if you have them? In other words, if you owe two people, is it right to pay them both? And the answer is yeah. It's not like, well, sorry, I only have to pay one debt. I'm only required to pay one by law. No, you're required to pay every debt that you have. Now, if you have a temporal debt to an earthly leader, then you pay that debt. And if you have an eternal debt to a spiritual ruler, then you pay that debt. Then keep in mind that if you owe one person X amount and another person Y amount, you pay them what you owe them. Now if you owe an earthly leader X and you owe your spiritual king Y, what do? You pay them both what they deserve. You're not off the hook because, well, I paid off, Grisha. I don't pay off his cousin. No, you have to pay off every debt that you owe. Pay your debt to the government. Pay your debt to God. And that's all he's saying. So with this now, he simply says, okay, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. And then it declares this, and they marveled at him. Now keep in mind, this word marveled has two tenses. One, it's a huge, they're just in absolute awe, but the word actually comes in a continuing sense, that they were like wowed, and it didn't go away. It didn't lessen at all. They're like, man, did you hear his answer? This is absolutely incredible. So we recognize here that what they were seeking to do is to give him the booby prize. They're saying, you want door number 1, door number 2, or the box, and, rotten tomatoes behind all of them. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a whole nother way to think about these things. Through his answer, they absolutely marvel. They absolutely marvel. For now, those of you that are note takers, those of you that jot things down, I would write this down. Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. Now, when Paul wrote to the church in Rome, one of the things that he made a declaration of in chapter 13 is he would say this, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there's no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. Now, the land has certain laws. And through that laws, we are all subject to those laws. And it declares this in verse 2, and this is huge. Whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, because they're placed there by the Lord. Now in verse 3, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Then do what is good, and you'll have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore, verse 5, you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sakes. Because of this, you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers according to attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due. Taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law. And so he recognizes that there are certain laws that we give to the government. There's a certain law that we give to each other, and that's love. And there's a certain law that we give to God, and that's the honor, the fear, the reverence. So, through this, when he gives the word, they all marveled. And keep in mind that it wasn't just one guy that said, whoa, that was pretty heavy. It wasn't just a couple, but everyone literally was in absolute awe, and that awe just continued. They're like, man, I can't believe what just happened. Well, they're not done yet. Verse 18. Then some Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him. And they asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote to us that if a man's brother dies and leaves his wife behind and leaves no children, his brother should take up his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. Now, the Sadducees were a very unique group. They believed in the written word. They believed in the law. However, they didn't believe in the spiritual. They didn't believe in the angels, that kind of things. They didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. Now, there's a portion of Scripture in the book of Acts, beginning in chapter 23, verse 6. If you're just a note taker, you might want to jot it down. I'm going to say Acts 23, verses 6 through 9. It declares this, but when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees, and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, concerning the hope and, note what he says, the resurrection of the dead I am being judged.